Very back and forth conversation works better for
All
me.
right, here we go. Hey guys, Pat Tokuyama here, creator of All Day I Eat Like a Shark, where I share my Japanese cooking videos once a week showing you guys how to make Japanese food. Today I have a special guest with me. I have Lauren from Mizuba Matcha, as you can see on the screen.
Hello.
And she's going to be giving us a little bit of a demo on how to make matcha, which is Japanese powdered green tea, at home, as well as a few tips. And if you guys have any questions or comments, you can feel free to leave them in the comments or the chat below. After the video, if you're a replay watcher, feel free to do the same, and we'll make sure that any questions get answered. So with that, without further ado, I'll go ahead and introduce Lauren. Lauren, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Lauren. Thank you, Pat. I own Mizuba Tea Company. We are based in both Santa Barbara, California and Portland, Oregon. I am currently in Portland today. It is raining, and so I thought there'd be nothing I'd like more than just to have a matcha moment with you guys, because I actually haven't had my matcha today, which is saying a lot because it's 5 p.m., but it's okay. Don't worry. I'll be able to fall asleep. Fun fact, I've had matcha at 11 p.m. before, was able to fall asleep. So that's nothing. All right. So getting into matcha, I would also always like to know who's had matcha, who's viewing. So if you guys are in the chat, just let us know. Give a little thumbs up if you've had it before. If not, what I thought we would do today is just like go over what is matcha, and how Mizuba got started, a little bit about why Mizuba is special, and then how I personally like to drink it. So I always like to introduce like the 5 main points of what makes matcha tea truly matcha, because I don't know if you're like me, but in the past couple of years, it just seems that there's been all sorts of kinds of matcha out on the market. And you're like, well, what's real? What's not? Why does one tea taste really earthy and muddy? And is it supposed to taste like that? Or is it really supposed to cure my gray hair or like cure my life? Like, like all sorts of stuff. So let's just bring it back to basics. Matcha is originally the only tea used in the Japanese tea ceremony for over 800 years. The tea ceremony is kind of a beautiful, iconic cultural heritage aspect of Japanese culture, and that's a whole nother live stream. But matcha, we're going to focus on the tea that is used in the tea ceremony and why it's a very specialty tea, if you will. So matcha comes from the same plant all tea comes from, the Camellia sinensis plant. I'm not sure if you guys know this, but all tea comes from one plant. And the only differences in between white, green, yellow, oolong, black tea is just the method of processing. So another class too, but for our purposes, matcha is considered like the champagne of Japanese green tea, for 2 reasons. Because of the history in the tea ceremony, like I mentioned before, and because it's been so revered as a tea in the tea ceremony, a lot of care and attention has been paid to processing the tea. So it's a highly specialized method of growing the tea plant. And so, for example, just like wine, you'll have very different aspects of the flavor of the tea come out from like different production methods of like where the tea is grown on a hillside, like what is the age of the plant, like um what time of year they're harvesting it. So a lot of variables are paid attention to in creating matcha. So that's like the first thing is matcha from the Camellia sinensis plant. First of all, is it from Japan is also my number 1 point. A lot of matcha companies will be like, oh, our matcha is from China or Taiwan. And it's not really matcha, it's powdered green tea. It has to come from Japan because of the cultural history. And without that, special variables like we talked about before that go into the processing, you won't have the revered flavors that come from a true Japanese matcha. Does that make sense? Same page? Cool.
Just like champagne. Champagne
Just like
only comes
champagne.
from Champagne in France.
Exactly, exactly. So the next point, so that was the first one, is matcha from Japan. My next point is matcha made from the shade grown processes? I have a lot of pictures of this on my website that you guys can go check out. It's mizubatea.com. We'll link you. But matcha is one of the only green teas that's shade grown. And what that means is that the plants grow in the sun all year. And then when it comes to harvest the tea, about 3 to 4 weeks prior, if it's a really quality matcha, our farmers will put tarps over these over the Camellia sinensis plants. And if you can imagine, there's two different styles. Sometimes they're like tarps laid directly on the plant, and then sometimes they're up on poles with like a synthetic black tarp. And these tarps block 90 to 95% of sunlight. That's a lot. These plants are getting very little sun. And I don't know about you, but if you've ever had a house plant that wasn't near the light, it probably died. But the Camellia sinensis, for some reason, when you inhibit the sunlight, that inhibits the plants from completing photosynthesis. And instead of dying, the tea plant sends all its nutrients to the leaf. So that's why you have, in quality matcha, really, really bright green powder. Sometimes it's so bright green, you're like, how's this real? The answer is, if it's true matcha, it's just straight chlorophyll, which is what makes plants green, right? It also sends up amino acids, which make high quality matcha really sweet, specifically the amino acid L-theanine. And it also has a concentrated amount of catechins, specifically epigallocatechin gallate, which has a bitter flavor. That's actually concentrated in the sun, but when you have that balance of the shade grown concentrated L-theanine, you get that pinnacle between sweet and savory, which is umami, right? So all that to say, if I haven't lost you guys with the nerdy science, you cannot have high quality matcha without properly shade grown tea, because you won't get that balanced flavor. Good?
Awesome.
Okay. Is it from Japan? Has it been shade grown? When you have properly shade grown matcha, I have my actual traditional stone mill here with me. And I don't know if we can get up really close in here, but when you have traditional matcha, it must be made from tencha. So tencha is the leaf that's been properly shade grown. This is like pre-matcha. And it's a quality point because you can't technically have matcha if it's been powdered other kinds of tea. Tencha is the correct term for appropriately processed tea leaves to become matcha. And you can see it's a really dark green leaf, and they're not really harvested for like shape. They're harvested most for color. So our farmers are looking for that deep concentration of chlorophyll. Okay, is it from tencha? Now, really quickly, has the matcha been stone milled? So this is called an ishi usu. And this is the traditional tool they would have had 800 years ago. It's made entirely from granite. And matcha actually literally translates to like rubbed tea, which means powdered tea. But you're wondering like, okay, so the tencha has to go through this mill. And let me see, I don't know if you guys can see this, but there's a groove here and it will spit out matcha. Mm-hmm. And to give you an idea, I was doing it over here. Let's see. Little matcha rains, you're probably not close enough to see it. But to give you an idea of how patient people were back 800 years ago, doing this slow would get me 1 tin of tea in an hour. So I have to grind this slowly as to not overheat the tencha. If I grind this really quickly, the tea leaves will kind of be destroyed and over-oxidized, and you lose all the nutritional components and the flavor integrity of the tea leaf. So ishi-usu. I obviously don't have like an army of people stone milling my matcha by hand in Japan. We have modern ones, and we have pictures of those on my website. They revolve only 30 revolutions per minute to make sure your matcha is super fresh. Cool. So those are my points of what makes matcha and what makes quality matcha. That is matcha.
Wow.
At base.
Very cool.
Really fast.
So how long do you actually use that stone mill to mill your own matcha, or is that just for demonstrating?
It's very therapeutic. On special
Yeah,
occasions, it's I teach matcha classes and tastings in my studio in Portland, Oregon. So if you're ever on Airbnb experiences, you can sign up for one of my classes and you can see the stone mill in action. So
nice.
yeah. So Mizuba got started because I have been studying specialty tea for 16 years. As a super nerd, I started studying tea when I was in middle school. And I was honestly kind of a hoarder of specialty tea all through high school. Through college, I would host like tea parties all the time where people would just like sit on my dorm room floor and we would drink tea. And all my friends around me were like, you need to do this for your life. And I was like, yeah, right. Oh, businesses, I don't even know how you would get my own tea or whatever. So I totally forgot about it for a couple of years. And then I had the opportunity to go visit a dear family friend who was teaching English and doing missions in Tokyo after Fukushima. And he's like, come visit Japan. And I was like, great, free place to stay. I'm going to go to Japan. And I did not go to Japan to start a company whatsoever. I actually was never planning on starting a tea company, but I knew there would be good tea in Japan. I just didn't know how good. And so, three main things kind of like were the catalysts of starting Mizuba. And the first one being, I really truly noticed high quality tea was accessible to everyone in Japan. And how I noticed this is that, like, when I would go travel abroad, the first place I go is usually the grocery store. Foreign grocery stores are like my all-time favorite thing on the planet. They're just so full of opportunity. And the first place I always go to is the tea section. And what I noticed is that the cheapest tea on the lowest shelf of the store was still 20 times better than anything I'd ever had back home in America. And actually, guys, this was 2013. So it wasn't that long ago. But again, I was just like, wow, I want to see this back home. This would be amazing. I was a senior in college. So with a college person's budget, I was like, I would love quality tea, you know? So that was the first thing. The second thing was every relationship I made in Japan was always over a cup of tea. And even though I experienced that back home, this, like, being able to communicate over tea when I didn't even speak Japanese was such a light bulb to me about how, like, my relationships solidified at home. Like, my mom would give me tea every morning in middle school, even though it was Constant Comment by Bigelow. I loved it. It was great. But I was like, that's how I experienced life with my mom. And then, like I mentioned before, all my friends in college, I was just like always over a cup of tea. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing was I just randomly got connected with a tea farmer and still wasn't planning on owning a company because I was graduating college. But we emailed for about 6 months. And then he and I were like, or it was kind of like, do you want to start importing? And I was like, okay. And that was 5 years ago. So all that to say, that's how Mizuba got started. And we are our farmers exclusive supplier in America. I don't know if you guys can see this banner behind me, but we're actually considered official Uji-cha tea dealers via our farmers by the Kyoto Chamber of Commerce. So we specialize in tea from Uji. And that was the bonus point of what makes matcha matcha. If you ever find Uji matcha, which we specialize in for a reason, it's the most revered growing region in Japan for matcha because it's where the birthplace of the tea ceremony was and where the first tea seeds were planted in the nation. So Uji has a very long history of specializing matcha growing processes and making it really delicious. So I want to share Uji cha with you guys, and let's make it. It's a very casual way how to make it, even though there's all these tools. They look intimidating. It's really cool and really approachable and truly just really beautiful. So what I have here, I have my chashaku. This is, it has matcha all over it. This is my chashaku tea scoop. And this is the traditional measuring device for getting your matcha out into your chawan. A traditional serving of matcha is 2 chishaku scoops. This isn't extremely consistent, so if you want to know, like, by the gram what your matcha serving should be, 2 to 3 grams. 2 grams is honestly enough for me, or like a half teaspoon. totally fine. The next tool I have is my Chawan tea bowl. Chawans come in a variety of flavors, if you will. There's beautiful ceramic artists who put their own take on it. I love this one. It's really traditional. My friend Sarah from Wolf Ceramics makes it for me. I don't know if you can see that. There she is. Anyway, on our website. And last but not least, the chasen. This one's actually really old. This is a couple years old. We only sell chasens that are carved from a single piece of bamboo into 120 prongs and then individually threaded at the base right here. So half kitchen utensil, half art piece, you know. But the reason you might find chasens in 80 prongs, 100 prongs, but the reason we only do 120 is because the more prongs you have, the more full you can aerate your tea. So, matcha. I'm drinking our Yorokobi today. Yorokobi means joy in Japanese. It's a single estate matcha, which is extremely rare, so I'm very fortunate and honored to carry it. If I can give you guys tasting notes for it, it tastes like flowers. Anyway, you have to try it for yourself. It's very smooth, very velvety, super silky. All of our matcha is actually, because we traditionally stone grind it, it's ground to 1 micron. It's really hard to describe unless you've ever like taken a chishaku and felt how fine matcha is ground. Anyway, very special. So I'm actually going to prepare matcha to, let's see if I can do this, like 2 style, basically. So I know a lot of people love sifting your matcha. You can totally do that. I actually don't. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think they had Sur La Table strainers 800 years ago, but that's, it's all right. It just depends on how well you can make koicha, thick tea. So I'm taking 2 chishaku scoops now, and let's actually take a moment to observe and look. I'm afraid I'm going to spill this, but here we go. Y'all can see that? Ooh, the lighting is not good. It looks pretty washed out from here, but let me see if you can get how.
We know that it's bright green.
It's very bright green. Maybe, is that better, you guys? There you go. So why don't I do this? I'll just do the hands version. All right, so this is actually, for me, 1 serving. I loaded up this chishaku. So I'm putting my matcha in my bowl. Cool. And now I'm going to take my kettle. I have 160-degree water right here. I don't recommend brewing matcha anything past 175 degrees Fahrenheit. You do not want to burn your tea. Actually, even before I do that, really important step for me, I need to put my tea away. Matcha is really sensitive to light, air, oxygen, basically life. So if it's exposed to anything, it will oxidize and not be as fresh. So cool, he's safe now. All right, so I'm making koicha. I'm going to take my 160-degree water and pour just an ounce into my bowl. I'm going to take my chasen and I'm going to gently knead my tea so that there's no clumps left. And basically, koicha, translating to thick tea, does 2 things. It gets rid of all the clumps, like I said, but it's, if you're familiar with bloom and coffee, it awakens the flavonols. It's kind of the same concept. So just the warm water just starts to awaken like the smells. And you guys, if you had smell-o-vision right now, this smells amazing. It smells super fresh. You can just get that sweet grass. You can kind of see how nice and shiny that is, right? All right. So my next step, and actually a fun fact, in the tea ceremony, you would actually drink koicha. It's a very intense experience. And that's why you always have wagashi or sweet next door. Okay. So, or next door after you drink it. So now we're going to make usacha. Usacha means thin tea. And traditionally, you would only have about 4 to 6 ounces of matcha at a time. It's not like, 20 ounce, what is it, venti? We don't do that. So I'm going to take my chasen and whisk really rapidly back and forth across my bowl. I'm not pushing hard. It's a very gentle motion. I don't know if you guys can see my wrist. Let's try that. Really gentle motion across the bowl until it's fully aerated. And you know it's a quality tea because that only took me, I don't know, Pat, how long did that take me?
Maybe like 15 seconds.
There you go. Itadakimasu. We are ready to drink our matcha. Yay! Yeah, delicious. And traditionally, I would actually slurp my matcha over my palate to get the fullest expression of flavor. So, yeah, thanks for joining me for my tea, you guys. I know that was a very quick overview. If you have any questions whatsoever, I am always available to answer them.
I have a few questions for you.
Okay. Oh, shoot.
So what's the purpose of slurping the matcha like you did just now?
Yeah. So when you slurp something over your palate, it washes fully across your tongue. So people also say it like has to do with if you get your whole face in there and slurp, like the way your senses interact with it is just more, what's the word I'm looking for? Not poignant, but more acute, I suppose. So when you actually test coffee, most professional roasters will slurp the coffee to get the true flavor of the beverage. Wine people, they'll like do the like gurgle in their mouth. It's kind of like a double slurp sometimes. It's like, so it's like it's getting the fullness of the flavor in your mouth. If that's the easiest way I can describe it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I do the same thing with my coffee because I roast coffee, and you
Oh,
can
you
definitely
do?
tell.
Wow.
You can sense or perceive the flavors a little bit better because a lot of taste is smell. I think 30 or 40% of taste has to do with the smell, and
You said it better than I did.
yeah, I think
Exactly.
that's the main reason why you want to slurp it like she just did, so that you can taste all the different flavors a little bit better.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I'm tasting that perfect balance of like that kind of steamed vegetal flavor, but with that sweet floral L-theanine.
So, in terms of the method that you use, the whisk, are there other ways that you can aerate the tea aside from the chasen? Like, so for example, if
Are
I have
you
a
talking more of like a traditional versus modern
yes,
situation?
that's what I was getting at.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. So, yes, not everybody has these. And like honestly, my main mission with Mizuba is to make high quality tea really accessible for everyone. So if you don't have this, I'm not going to be mad. I'm going to say, "No, great. Let's make matcha the way that works for you because also the best cup of tea is the one that you enjoy the most." So, if you have say a blender at home, I'm not going to get mad at you. I have a lot of friends that love lattes. So they'll put a teaspoon of matcha in their blender with, again, not boiling water, add everything they want from adaptogens to collagen to honey to maybe even a little bit of cinnamon. And they'll put their almond milk in there and they'll just obliterate it, which is fine. Yeah, you're more than welcome to put it in a blender. There's also handheld frothers. That you can get at IKEA or Sur La Table, and that is really easy to froth things. I'd say personally, I think I love the two-step process of making koicha and then usacha because all the clumps get out. I can't say it's as easy to get the clumps out using the handheld frother. But then my last thing, actually, let me get something real quick. Hang on. This is my pro tip. So this is a secret, you guys. Okay, this is just for people watching the video and me. If you have a cute Mizuba thermos or a mason jar or whatever, something with a tight lid, honestly, you can just put half a teaspoon of matcha in here, fill it up with water, and shake it. There's nothing in here. It's just paper. You don't need any like special protein powder ball. You literally just shake it like a cocktail. And I guess it's not so secret because we have a video showing you how to do that on our website. So if you go to our video guides, check it out. It means you can make your matcha on your morning commute when you're sitting in traffic.
Awesome. How awesome is that?
Pretty dang awesome.
So in terms of matcha, I guess the storage methods, what
Mm.
would you recommend the way, like, how would you recommend, what's the best way to store your matcha tea after you've opened it?
I am so glad you asked that because a lot of people don't realize you actually want to keep your matcha in your fridge. So this says please refrigerate after it's open. Um, Again, for the reason of you, when you put your matcha in your fridge, it slows the oxidation process down. So the fridge helps keep the flavors of your matcha fresher longer. It's totally fine to keep your matcha out not in a sunny place. You want to keep it in a cool, dark place in your cupboard, say, before it's opened. So it's totally shelf stable until you open it. And it won't rot or anything like that, but there is kind of like the consensus and this that kind of old traditional wisdom that the first cup of matcha that you make from a new tin will always be the best. Then like life, it slowly diminishes.
That makes sense.
Sorry. Yeah.
So I guess in terms of selecting a matcha, like if I'm totally new to matcha, what is the difference between like a $5 or $10 bag of matcha versus one that costs
Oh,
$100?
yeah. Oof, yeah. I'll just start with saying that the integrity of the company is the most important. Um, it's tough. I have one foot in the wine world where like finding cheap wine is like the best thing you can do. But honestly, with matcha, you really do get what you pay for. And because like the reason I delineated all of like what makes quality matcha in the beginning of this live stream is because the term matcha itself isn't really regulated. So there's all sorts of people who can say whatever they want. They can say, oh, this crushed tea leaf is from Japan, is from Uji, when in fact it was probably like grown in Australia. True life. That happens. So get to know your matcha supplier just like you would get to know your farmer at the farmer's market. Like really find out where they're from, um, what their relationship with their farmers are like, if they can provide the answers to like, hey, was your matcha shade grown? Like, is it from the Camellia sinensis leaf? That's a great place to start. um, and it's tough though because I totally understand. You know, you want to afford something good, and to kind of break it down, how we approach it, because I personally work with my farmers in Uji, Japan, and my matcha producers. I'm able to cut out a lot of costs. So, for example, my daily matcha, even though it's $20 up front, there's actually 30 servings in these tins. So that breaks down to about 60 cents a cup. Whereas I love my coffee shops. We work with over 200 specialty coffee shops in America, but you can be paying up to $6 a matcha latte in the coffee shop, and you're paying for the talent of the baristas, you're paying for the experience, you're paying for just the beautiful craft that that coffee shop has to offer. So I really promote both ways of enjoying matcha, but in making high quality accessible. Um, Usually you just want to do your research, do your homework, and cost it out for you too.
Okay.
Does that make sense, everybody?
Yes, it does.
Cool.
Very good advice. So in terms of other regions in Japan that grow matcha, do you think that the flavor, I guess in your experience, does the flavor differ depending on where it was grown?
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. I mean, so with Mizuba, we actually carry 6 different kinds of matcha. And even though we have a matcha that's produced a couple minutes down the road from one of my other matchas, they're totally different. Um, I mentioned the tea plant. Within the tea plant in Japan, you can have over 300 cultivars of the tea plant with all their own different flavor profiles. So, for example, our matcha teas are made from Yabukita cultivar, Zairai cultivar, Okimidori cultivar, what else? Samiadori cultivar. So just like that's another class where it gets really nerdy. You're getting deep into Japanese tea, but just like you have a green tea, right? You have a red wine. You've got Syrah. You've got Pinot. You've got Merlot. I don't drink Merlot though. It's the same kind of concept. You have totally different flavor expressions based on how this was produced, and it's kind of great because in quality matcha, you can really get to know the producer's kind of mark on that tea and what kind of flavor profiles they appreciate. Or again, as an agricultural product, you're getting different flavor expressions year to year. Even though matcha's it's unique in that it's blended for consistency.
Right.
So the farmers are able to kind of control their craft and how they want to present their tea.
So I think you said that you have a single estate matcha. Is that what you said?
Yeah, that's the one I drank, actually. This is the Yorko.
Okay. So what is the difference between a blended matcha and a single estate?
Yeah, so it's kind of difficult because if we have any coffee aficionados watching us today, single estate coffee has kind of been this really trendy, really desired product, but it does not translate to matcha, really. A lot of some companies are purporting like, oh, our matcha is only unblended. And honestly, that's kind of discrediting like 70% of the artistry of matcha. And I'll explain. So when we have the tencha, right? Tencha, matcha truly is only made from prior year's harvest. So tencha has to age. It has to be kept in cold storage so the flavors mature. If you drink matcha from shinsha or new harvest, it's too young. It tastes green. It doesn't have the full expression or body of flavor that you can get out of tencha. So farmers will take about 80 to 90% prior year's harvest and blend it with 10 to 20% New Year's harvest. That allows for consistency of flavor, what the farmers are looking to get out of a matcha. But yeah, and you can play with the shade growing too, but it allows and I'm trying to think of cultivars. That's one element as the maturity of the tencha, but then the other element is when you have all these different cultivars or variables in growing, how long it's been shade grown, what elevation on the hill it was grown at. Actually, for us, a big distinction is how old the plant is. So I have matchas that are grown from 35-year-old plants, or sorry, harvested from plants that are 35 years old. And I have one that's harvested from plants that are 45 years old. So you can take tencha from, the year before, and then shinsha from the plant when it's a little bit older, and blend that and get unique flavors. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so that's really interesting. It's pretty similar, it sounds like, to coffee, what's done with coffee. So you said that the matcha leaves need to be aged before they're actually ground. So can you talk about that process? Like what is done to them, if anything, to age the leaves?
Nothing. So tencha, it goes through a very similar process that like all tea is going through. It goes through a drying process, a sorting process, but we keep our tencha in cold storage all year. So then when I order my tea, it's stone ground to order. So it's very fresh, but keeping it cold storage all year before the manufacturer does the blending allows the tea to just mature. But I realized I didn't answer your question about like the difference of single estate. This will still be made from aged tencha. It's just one plot of land that's unblended. So it's very rare.
So the aging process, like, is it going to matter if it's aged just for 1 month versus a year? Are we going to notice like a flavor difference?
If you're a connoisseur.
Okay.
I mean, I would start with tasting different matchas from one producer and getting kind of like just studying the difference in variables of how it was grown to understand, what you're tasting against other teas.
Right.
Does that make
Yes,
sense?
that does. So I think that's going to be it for questions. I don't know if anybody in the chat has anything that they'd like to ask. Let me just take a poll really quick.
No worries. Thanks for joining me, you guys.
I think you said that the matcha is seasonal. So when is the season? Is there ever a season where matcha is at its peak? Or because it gets aged, yes, you can have it any time of the year and the quality won't suffer as a result?
So like I mentioned before, shinsha is like harvest season. that was this year. It changes from year to year based on the weather. This year, my manufacturers told me it'll start around like the first week of May. Um, Sencha or other loose leaves might be a little bit earlier. It might be like mid-April. Um, just depends on the
Hmm.
region too. But it's really weather driven. So that's the first harvest, and then, like I said, because it has to be aged, matcha. Like I guess they'll start selling this year's matcha around November. There's a whole tea festival, I think, like one weekend, October, November in Uji, that they're like, here's our matcha. Yeah,
Okay. All right. Well, I think that's going to be it for today. And I know that you put together a special offer for us. I think you said,
I did. I wanted to share everything with
yeah.
you guys.
So would you like to tell us about your offer?
Oh, sure. Well, Pat and I were talking, and I would love to share with you guys a 15% off discount code that, Pat, you made it available
Yep.
somewhere. Cool.
It'll be at the bottom of
Cool. Would
this.
you like to tell them what that
It'll be at the
code
bottom of
is?
this video. It expires on April 30th, and I think it's Mizuba Sharks. So I'll put that in the description below for you replay watchers and anybody else who's watching right now.
Great. Thanks,
Okay,
guys.
well, that's going to be it for today's video. Appreciate you guys watching. If you want to see more videos like this one, subscribe if you haven't already. Give us some feedback. Let us know what you liked and what you didn't like. And I think other than that, we'll see you in our next video. Jana, bye-bye.
Matane. Bye.